Taiwan is headed for its midterm elections. Campaigns are turning white hot. Voters will cast their ballots to fill 9 local offices, but they need to make another crucial decision on the very same day. The Taiwanese will be voting on a referendum to lower the voting age and eligibility for contesting in the elections. The 18-year-old civil rights referendum will ask voters if they agree to amend the constitution and lower the voting age from 20 to 18. Voters will also decide whether the minimum age of a candidate running for public office should be lowered to 18, which is 23 at the moment. Taiwan has sought to lower the voting and candidacy ages for more than a decade now. However, the ruling and opposition parties failed to reach a consensus until earlier this year. But now that amendment has been approved by legislators across party lines, it faces several other hurdles. And the biggest of them is the higher voter threshold required. More than 50% of the eligible voters nationwide need to approve the referendum, which means more than 9.6 million voters need to vote yes for the proposal to pass. It is important to note that the previous 4 referendums for different agendas had much lower thresholds. One required 1/4 of eligible voters to vote in favour. Another merely said that the yes votes should surpass the no votes. Referendums in 2004, 2008 and 2021 all failed to reach 50%, and needless to say, the votes in favour were far below the threshold for a constitutional amendment to pass. Only last month, a survey showed that only 43% of eligible voters expressed a willingness to vote in favour of the amendment. Another survey found that more than half of the voters were doubtful whether teens are ready for such responsibilities. 18-year-olds are defined as adults in Taiwan's civil code and the criminal code. They are obliged to complete the military service and pay taxes. They are eligible to work in public office and are expected to take full criminal responsibility in all legal matters. Despite that, some say people under 20 are too young to make political decisions. Most candidates running for office are older than 50. The average age for elected village heads is about 58. Most people in Taiwan seem to be overlooking an important fact. You see, teenagers are more concerned about public issues today. This includes environmental protection, climate change, gender equality and human rights. They are more mature and responsible when it comes to scrutinizing and making judgments about civic issues as well. Meanwhile, the referendum is being slammed by Beijing as a bid to pave the way for formal independence for the island. Even if the referendum does not pass, it signals that the Taiwanese authorities have been able to gather the necessary support. And this could help initiate other constitutional amendment polls, which can possibly intensify the pressure on Beijing. China will also be keeping a close watch on the Taiwanese midterms. The main opposition party has been traditionally known to favour closer ties with Beijing. While it strongly denies being pro-China, it mostly avoids campaigning on issues related to Beijing. On the other hand, all pro-independence party candidates, including Chen, have signed a pledge of no surrender to China. While cross-strait relations dominate Taiwan's presidential elections, the midterms are different. They have always been focused on domestic issues such as social welfare, housing and energy. But President Tsai Ing-wen and senior government officials have urged voters to use these elections to stand up to Beijing. The results of the local polls will be used to gauge whether the political parties have the best chances of winning the island's leadership in 2024, when Chairwoman Tsai Ing-wen will step down from the presidential post.
Ambassador, it's so nice to have an opportunity to talk to you over the
Now, for more analysis, joining me now is Ross Darrell Feingold, who is a political analyst. Thanks for joining us, Ross. Welcome to the broadcast.
Good evening from Taipei.
Right, so local elections usually focus on domestic issues, but in the case of Taiwan this time, President Tsai has urged voters to use the elections as a platform to stand up to Beijing. What's your take on this?
That's a really interesting point, because actually in recent local elections here in Taiwan over the past couple of decades, if a party feels that its electoral chances aren't looking good, then actually they take the election away from domestic issues or local municipal issues, because people are voting for their local municipal leaders and municipal councils in this election. And they will introduce the broader issues of Taiwan's status, its relationship with China. So actually, that aspect of this election is not necessarily new. We've seen it before. And again, usually it means a party has kind of run out of things to talk about, or they know they're not persuading the voters with regard to their candidates and their ideas for local governance. So then they'll pull in the issues with regard to China. But we shouldn't be too cynical or critical about that, because actually it does have appeal with a lot of voters as well. Instead of talking about local traffic or things like that, start talking about Taiwan's national security. It does have appeal with voters.
China will, of course, be closely watching these midterms. Do we expect any reaction from Beijing on what happens?
Yeah, that's also a great point. So regardless of what happens and whichever party does well in these local elections, China will react. You mentioned the referendum, which is to amend the Constitution. And you were correct that China doesn't like any action towards amending the Constitution because they see that as a precursor to what we like to call de jure moves towards independence. And most notably, that would be changing the name, changing the border, changing the flag, things like that. So that makes Beijing very concerned. So they definitely don't like the referendum. As far as the local election and office holders goes, if the Democratic Progressive Party does well, then China will certainly criticize that. But let's be frank, any exercise of democracy, regardless of which party does well, is not something that China likes to see here in Taiwan. So regardless of which party does better or worse tomorrow, I think we're still going to see China make its usual statements and reiterate their policies towards Taiwan.
Right. Just a final question there, Ross. Is there a sense or rather public sentiment on ground when it comes to who or which party may win? We know the opposition party is expected to toe the Beijing line, as they say.
It looks like that the opposition party will probably win more of the local executive seats in cities and counties, but they have a historical pattern of having done so. So actually, that wouldn't be a surprise. But I think it's important for our audience to keep in mind that even if the opposition does well in the local election tomorrow, it's not an indication of what will happen in the national elections for the president and the legislature in January 2024.
Ross, thank you so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.